Welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming along to our event, Cyber in the Boardroom, Risk Quantification for SMEs. We've pulled together a great group of speakers and panelists to help you grasp the nettle on the issues facing SMEs, which in simple terms we would say would be that most SMEs recognize the risk to their business from cyber and cyber attacks. But unfortunately, less than 1 in 3 of those that recognize that risk have actually done pretty much anything about it. And we believe that part of that is just a lack of understanding about how to approach the problem and how to address that issue. So that's what this panel and presentation is going to be about today. It's trying to give that empowerment to those people to have the confidence to move forward. So with that, I'm very pleased to say we have Jack Harrigan from DCIT, who's going to kick off the event today, talking us through the cyber governance agenda that the UK government has and how that's going to drive down to the SMEs in terms of roles and responsibilities. And then we've got a panel of experts from across the market who are specialists in risk quantification. And we have, in no particular order, Laurie from Iranios. We have Johnny from Threatplane and Niall from Cydia and Casper from Aviva, each with their own perspective on how to approach the cyber risk challenge. This event series is supported by and led by the Southwest Cybersecurity Cluster, and for whom I do work. And we are also supported by Moon Executive Search, who see that this is a gender issue that they want to make sure is on the board for all organisations. So thank you to them for supporting us on this event. And thank you to all of our media partners who've helped us promote this event and get it going. So I dropped into the link the fact that this is the second in the series of webinars that we're planning to run probably quarterly. So if you want to see the previous one in this series that kind of introduced the challenge, then that link is on the YouTube channel, and this event will be recorded and placed there as well. Unfortunately, take notes from Jack's presentation, as his part will not be part of that presentation. It's a government requirement. So we will now move on to the panel session. So I'd like to start off by having each of our panelists just do a quick 1 minute intro of themselves, just so that people know who you are and what perspective you're speaking from. Again, no particular order, so I'm going to start with Casper.
Yep, thanks, Jeff. Good morning, everybody. My name's Casper Stopp. So I am the underwriting manager for cyber at Aviva PLC. Just to give you some context to that, so I look after a portfolio of thousands of clients, of which 99% of them are SMEs. And I deal with their cyber insurance requirements, including risk management strategies pre-event, as well as kind of the post-event incident remediation.
Brilliant, thank you. Niall.
Good morning, Niall Macaro, Consulting Director at a company called Cydia. We specialise in cyber risk management. I have a background in cybersecurity consulting, doing quantitative and qualitative risk assessments across government and commercial clients.
Thank you. And Laurie?
Hiya, Laurie Gibbet. So I lead our cyber governance, risk and compliance practice at Iranios. We're a boutique cyber consultancy, Swiss-based. I've been delivering cyber risk quantification, helping clients of all sizes, whether small, medium, large, for about 5 years now, and also involved in previous research into risk quantification you may have seen or heard about.
Brilliant, thank you. And Johnny?
Morning, everyone. I'm Johnny Tyers, founder of a company called Threatplane. We've been around for nearly 10 years, and we work with technology companies, large and small, on pragmatically managing their cyber risk and linking it to business objectives and business plans and growth.
Brilliant. So I'd like to start off with a question to you, Laurie, which the others can follow up on. SMEs often do not know where or how to start looking at cyber risk. So can you start off just by helping us by defining risk in a cyber and SME leadership context?
Yeah, sure, but I don't think the definition really matters, whatever the size of the business. Cyber risk is the same. So I define cyber risk as, well, what are the consequences or impact of a cyber threat affecting something important to your business and causing real harm? So you could break that down as, well, what is the threat? So what could go wrong and how does it happen? The asset, what is it you care about? Is that data confidentiality? Is it the availability of a core system to your business? Then what happens if it goes wrong? And that impact can be quantified into different categories, which I'm sure we'll touch upon later. But for small and medium-sized businesses, the margin for error when it comes to the financial side is generally smaller. So I was at a Women in Cyber conference yesterday, and someone said that 60% of small organizations go out of business within 6 months when they've had a fall victim for a large cyber incident. So it's quite scary, but we could be proactive. So where I recommend, from a starting point you mentioned, again, this was mentioned by Jack as well. So focus on what really matters. So what are your critical assets? What is it that could actually hurt you? Then think about what are the scenarios that could cause you damage. So ask yourself questions like, what happens if we can't access our systems for a few days? What happens if customer data exposed? Just make it tangible. And then prioritize where to focus that maximizes your risk reduction, tie it back to money and operations. And you do this by taking a threat-led approach, do a scenario, just sit down and storyboard it. You don't have to make it complicated. But ultimately, boards make decisions based on business risk. So you communicate risk to leaders, in my view. It's not technical. It needs to be framed in terms of financial impact or operational disruption, reputational, and that's particularly as well if you're in private sector.
Yeah, thank you. So, Johnny, where do you see that disconnect between the technical teams trying to explain this and the executives in the organizations trying to understand it?
Um, I mean, the two are often siloed, and there's a huge language barrier there, clearly. The guts of cyber is a complex topic. It's very technical. It gets technical very quickly on top of your existing sort of technical depth that IT and applications in any SME already have. Um, in particular for SMEs, of course, IT is often outsourced as well. So you've also got that kind of disconnect out of the organization. And the key challenge, I mean, Laurie said taking a threat-led approach, and that's a really sensible one. What you want to do is try and bring the two things under the same umbrella so that the board are understanding the issues from a business risk perspective, but that's also linked to this threat-led setup. So, we normally recommend building a threat model, which brings the two things together, for example, and that's a way of unifying those two separate teams, separate languages into a single unified view.
So, Niall, so what information does the executive actually need to make that cyber investment decision, just at a high level to start with?
Yeah, there's a key point there that cyber risk is business risk, and really it's about making a business case for investment. And one of the things we often start with companies asking them, what is their tolerance or risk? Laurie's already talked about it, especially when you're a startup, but actually defining that risk tolerance and talking to the business about what kind of risk they can tolerate in terms of pounds and pence. And then you've actually got something to compare against and build the business case for investment in the business as well.
Yeah. So, Casper, when the executives are presented with this information, how do they balance that? What's an acceptable risk, right? Because bottom line is we can't get rid of the risk. So how do you help understand where to draw the line?
Yeah, I'd probably break it down this way. I'd say, in our experience, cyber risk manifests as financial loss in three ways. The first one is cybercrime and cyber theft. The second one is loss of either personal information, which is sensitive, or confidential corporate information. And the third bucket is business interruption, your inability to trade and do business with your customers. And I suspect if you ask the audience, what is your appetite for having either money stolen from you, your loss of reputation to your customers, or your business interruption, it's actually very low. But businesses have to think about how that, or executives have to think about how that would manifest in their own business. And there is some variation, and I'll give you an example of this. Now, if you think of two businesses, and before I get accused of stereotyping, I did go into Google this morning and type in what is the Southwest famous for food-wise, right? And two of the ones that came up to me was cider and Cornish pasties, right? So imagine this. If you are a cider manufacturer, cider is not a largely perishable stock. I mean, it will survive for a few weeks. So if you have a cyber event, and let's take typically the most severe one, a business interruption event, you have a few weeks or a reasonable amount of time which you could probably fix, remediate the event, and maybe your customers would be none the wiser. The impact to your business would be very minimal. If you are a Cornish pasty manufacturer, that is a perishable product. You probably have 2 or 3 days before you can't supply your customers with Cornish pasties. People start to notice it has a financial impact on your business. So what I would say to everyone listening on this is you need to think about how quickly it would affect your business, your customers would realize reputational risk. I suspect most of the listeners are in the Cornish pasty bucket rather than the cider bucket, but that should really drive your risk appetite.
Brilliant. Yeah. Okay. So I just wanted to spring up, while we're talking about risk, some of the perspectives of risk, because I've now lost my slide for some reason. Hang on a second. Yeah, here we go. So I'll just share this. Can you see that slide? Good. Okay. So just thought it was worth just discussing some stats that we received from the Southwest Cybercrime Unit about who's being attacked and how often. And here in the Southwest, as of from 2024 October to November 2025, you can see from the SME point of view that quite a significant proportion of businesses suffered a cyber attack. And if it gets to the level of being recognized by the police, then something consequential has happened. And it's also interesting to note how often those attacks are happening. So those that are attacked, very often they're attacked more than once. Sometimes they're attacked even more frequently than that. So there's quite a level of risk going on in the business. We've already talked a little bit about the impact of that. There's the other slide. There it is. But what's interesting is that they think that probably less than 10% of those attacks are actually being reported, possibly because they weren't sufficiently consequential, possibly because people are embarrassed. So the actual number of attacks, which was 162, could be 1,620. So it's quite a large number. And the types of attacks coming in, most of them are social media, email. Some of them are virus and malware checking. And then we get down to the ransomwares, which tend to be the really painful and costly ones. And the direct financial costs that you can be pretty sure you're going to incur at some level is about 3,500. But that excludes all of the costs associated, because the police can only capture the direct costs associated with the loss. So any subsequent costs like lost business, any subsequent investment you have to put into your IT to maintain it, any loss of or staff turnover, the cost of your PR marketing plan for recovery, none of those costs are included, and that significantly, probably puts another, digit on the end of that, probably takes up to £35,000 plus, which I think was around about the number that Jack mentioned on the recent study from KPMG. So what's also interesting is another connection that's going on is that there is a added level of concern around cyber-enabled crimes, which are ones which use cyber to initiate, but the crime itself generally falls into categories that are not cyber as far as the police are concerned. And that reaches, again, pretty large numbers, about 1,000 here in the Southwest. So there's some pretty big impacts going on, some pretty big, what's going on there? Let me just get that back. Try. I've lost control of my screen. Where is it? There it is. Stop sharing. So I just wanted to put those numbers in because they were on our previous webinar, which I've put the link for in there. But I think just having a quantified perspective helps people understand the nature and level of the actual risk to their business. Because as Jack rightly pointed out at the beginning, this is not about somebody targeting you. You just happen to be a digital target on the internet and you were the unlucky one that they found a way in on. So generally speaking, particularly for SMEs, they're not aiming for specific businesses. So let's move on a little bit and talk a bit about cyber risk as a business risk. And can we start off with a few examples of the risks and consequences for an SME? So Johnny, if I can start with you on that one.
Yeah, I mean, we've obviously talked a little bit already about some of the consequences, so I can just delve into that a little bit further. When we're working with customers, we tend to use a framework that we call ROCs, which is a threat plane framework that just helps to kind of capture this all in a nice, easy way. So we tend to find the risks boil down to revenue. And we've talked a little bit about systems going offline particularly can immediately impact revenue either because you can't produce goods or you can't collect payments or customers can't find you, etc. Revenue, reputation, operations, compliance and safety. And we tend to find those categories sort of capture the different nature of business risk that certainly our customers encounter. And yeah, some examples, as I say, would be things like payment systems being offline. If you're an e-commerce business or if you derive a lot of your sales and kind of marketing, lead gen, etc., from, for example, an online presence, then your website going offline or the systems that sit behind it can actually materially affect revenue as well. And that's not just in the immediate, but if you have customers that then think that your business isn't functioning or whatever, then there may well be quite a delay in recovering that revenue to to the levels that you'd expect.
Yeah. And Laurie, in what ways do cyber risk overlap with the business risks in this context?
Well, they completely overlap. And I know we've talked a lot about cyber risks, but there's also operational risks. So, like your IT system could go down. It might not be from a cyber attack, but if your IT system go down, you're losing, your employees can't work effectively. You're losing time, you're losing revenue. If customer data is exposed, it's not just a security issue. There's reputational damage. You might have customers go elsewhere to like a competitor. You might have a regulatory fine because of that breach. Or maybe like you've had a phishing attack and someone's clicked a link in that email and there's a direct financial loss because they've accidentally made payment to the wrong person. So I think we're all singing from the same hymn sheet here. That it's a question of what can you actually withstand, what can you mitigate, what's actually going to hurt you. And I know that, Casper was talking about, well, what's the time? What can you deal with in terms of disruption? But it's also what financially can you deal with in terms of impact? And I think there is this trend in terms of the way we think about risk appetite, moving away from typical likelihood and actually towards, the impact and consequence. That's why a lot of the messaging we're seeing, like from the government action plan, for example, is all around resilience and business resilience.
Yeah, indeed. So Niall, how do we practically approach the measuring of that risk in our business? What's the starter for 10? Don't go into the details at this stage.
Yeah, I mean, a starter for 10 is you obviously, as people have noted already, not to treat cyber as a technical subject. To quantify the risk, we need to talk in business terms and start looking for data. When we start to quantify risk, we often get told there's no data available. There's a lot of data available, lots of external sources of, especially around probability, even for your particular sector, but also look internally in terms of your business. We've already talked about the Cornish pasty business as an example. You take your annual turnover, divide it by 52, and you've got an example of a potential loss for a week's trading of Cornish pasties. We don't need to be absolutely accurate. We're looking to be precise. And there's a quote that all models are wrong, but some are useful. And it's about using enough of a model to get a view and be precise enough that you're confident in your decisions. But you very start some very broad variables and work quite quickly into a model that the board and the directors can trust to make decisions.
Absolutely. So Casper, again, you may have another example where you've seen where cyber risk has a clear impact. So, you're out there covering the bases. Just help us round that off with an example, naming no
Yeah,
names.
no, I thought Niall was going to cover my point for me there. I just want to build on what he said. So here is a really easy exercise for all the listeners, and it is very much a starting point, right? Work out your revenue over 52 weeks, or actually 12 months, right? And then break one single month down by 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks. Do that on the X or the Y axis. And then on the other axis, work out, do 10%, 25%, 50%, and 75% of your business, right? And that is an axis of your revenue per week that you are losing effectively, right? So the biggest number is going to be 4 weeks at 75% loss of revenue. And put a pin in where it really starts to hurt your business, right? So let's imagine you've put the number in at £25,000, right? So you can actually roughly see on a business interruption example, right? Okay, well, I can do 2 weeks at 25%, and then I'm in real difficulty, etc. I'd also overlay that onto, I talked about financial crime before, right? If your pain figure is 25 grand, are you moving amounts more than £25,000 within your business? Are you paying them? Do you have checks on them? Again, you can see where that would really start to hurt your business if someone stole one of those to you. Same again, that £25,000. If you had a privacy event, that is almost your retainer for legal fees, any regulatory investigation, again, before it starts to really impact your business. So just to quantify, where have I seen it? I mean, I deal with losses all the time. Let me go for the bigger one. People are always a little bit interested in ransomware. So ransomware, I probably deal with at least twice a week. Small businesses having these events. Just to give the audience a flavour of it, because I know everyone has a view on whether they'd pay it or not on their head. Roughly 90% of the customers I talk to say they won't pay in the event. When it happens, that number shifts to about 50-50, end up deciding to pay it based on practicality. The largest ransomware I've ever seen, demand is 20 million. Now, I know everyone's saying, I'm an SME. That was made against an SME. Now, I'm not saying that they paid 20 million, but it was a very, very large one. The smallest is about £50,000, right? But it averages significantly higher than that. So just to give a flavour of what's going on out there.
Thank you. Hope we're not scaring the horses too much, but remember, not everyone's being hacked. I think it was 7% of attacks are ransomware here in the Southwest, but when they come, they're serious and they're significant. I'm going to stick with you, Casper, because we're going to move into risk a bit more as it's your business. Can you briefly describe, when and why insurance fits into this risk mitigation picture for SMEs and give us some perspective on your sort of pricing approach, just because a lot of the people here probably haven't even considered it. I'm not looking for a sales pitch. I'm looking for the model. Yeah, just a big high level model.
Yeah, I mean, what I'd say is we are focused not just on insurance being you've had a loss, we remediate. We really want to actively engage with all of our customers on pre-event mitigation. So we have, lots of services before that we can offer our customers, because we do understand, I think this is one of the hardest parts for SMEs, is there's lots of advice out there. There's lots of providers offering lots of different products and services. And where we really focus on is, what can we advise you that is practical for your business? And what I mean by that is what is practical for the budget you have, right? And I'll give you an example, right? Let's take Cyber Essentials. Everything that Cyber Essentials advises, you can get that piece of that risk control free of charge if you want to, from some sort of supplier, right? But we deal in, as a business, can we tell our customers which 10 controls will have the greatest efficacy that is within budget that they can implement? So that's a big part of our business. We really want you to have no event at all, rather than be helping you when you do have an event. Then one of the things we do as insurers are, we have minimum standards for our insurance, and the way that really works is, we think it raises the overall cybersecurity maturity posture. And it's simply this, if you left your front door open and got burgled, is that a good risk management? No. So we need businesses to take the same approach with regard to cybersecurity, that they do need to have controls across their business to help protect their organization.
Brilliant. Yeah, thank you. So, Laurie, Laurie, can you discuss where cyber fits in the broader business resilience process as a costed element?
Yeah, I know we've spoken a lot about this already, in terms of cyber risk being business risk and how it is kind of integral and kind of integrated there. But just kind of building on the cyber insurance element of that. So it's often the strategic element of business resilience. And I think if a single incident can happen and it's going to impact the survival of your business, then yes, it's quite important. I think it's difficult though to balance the kind of cost against the value. So should you invest heavily in insurance coverage, or should you actually spend some of that money to reduce your risk? So I just don't see it as a replacement in putting in effective cybersecurity, but it's about how do you have that as your kind of costed final layer of security. So you're transferring that risk to the insurer where the cyber risk mitigation can't fully protect your business. But as Casper says, there's so many free things available, especially to small businesses, charities. There's a lot out there that you can do without breaking the budget.
Yeah, but figuring out which one, challenge. So, Johnny,
That's
can
where
you
cyber
actually
risk
help us
can help.
So yeah, Johnny, can you bring in how that identified risk can be costed to the business? Just a little bit of an insight on that.
Yeah, I mean the key thing is understanding where the risk sits in terms of I mean we always end up working with systems and processes, and to a lesser extent people in your business. And what you're looking for is where is revenue generated, where are operations driven from in terms of in your business. And from there, that's a really good starting point for deriving costings, I'd say in summary.
And Niall, same question to you.
Yeah, very similar approach when we do a risk assessment for a client. We actually don't go and talk to the technical people, the IT department. They're the very last people we talk to. We go and talk to the different part lines of the business. We ask the managers, what do you do? What are you defending? And then we go and talk to HR. We go and talk to process owners. We go and talk to department leads and talk them through in terms of their process and work out what are those key business systems and processes that need protecting, and then start gathering data around how critical they are. And the Cornish pasty example is probably a key example. We'll start to work out the cost of Cornish pasty, how many you move in a month, a week, and use all that data to build an estimate. As was a very good example of building an idea of what are the potential pain points in those different areas of business process, and then go and talk to technical teams about what controls we have in place to prevent that risk.
Yeah. So actually, now if we can continue on that, can you just walk us through, that qualification versus quantification process?
Yeah, it's just two different ways of approaching risk. I think people sometimes forget and a bit scared of when we talk about risk quantification, certainly from my experience. Either saying there's no data available, but fundamentally we're still talking about assessing risk in the same way as a combination of varying degrees of probability of attack in the first place, and also measuring the impact. And it's measuring the impact where we start to be a bit more precise about communicating with the business. I've spent like 20 years doing qualitative risk assessments. They tend to fall down a little bit when you actually produce the output, especially if you start to plot it on a sort of 5 by 5 risk matrix. And you will find things like ransomware is a good example, where somehow it'll always appear in the top right-hand corner, and it'll always be highly probable and highly impactful, which is kind of true. It can be, as we talked about, there can be some very large losses. But actually, ransomware could be caught early and just a single laptop is taken offline. So there's a range of different possible losses, even for a risk scenario like ransomware. And quantitative risk assessment enables you to be much more fine-grained about your analysis and say there's a higher probability of a low loss, but actually a vanishing small chance of that big loss, and actually then applies controls specifically to manage those different areas of that threat. So you might want to improve the way that you rebuild a laptop, because that can actually save you money 5 times a year that happens, and then you buy cyber insurance to cover that vanishing small but very impactful cost of the ransomware and be assured that if that ever did happen, your insurance would hopefully kick in. But yeah, risk quantification enables a more fine-grained analysis rather than just everything's in the top right and it's all red and needs the same controls to manage it.
And Laurie, how would add or to that sort of perspective on the qualification versus quantification?
Well, I also moved into quantitative where I was doing a lot of qualitative assessments and I was like, oh my gosh, I've got a shopping list of 100 things I should be doing, but I don't know where to prioritize. But I still do it. At the end of the day, if you if you want to quantify, you still need that qualitative data to actually feed it. So like what security measures do you already have in place? What is the business insight into the consequence categories that would occur from like certain cyber threat scenarios? Something that I find helpful and I use is to use like a bow tie diagram or like a flow chart type diagram. So like what is the threat scenario? What is the effect on the asset or the business service that I care about? And then what are the consequences? And then for each of those consequences, I can break down what that means financially. So I personally think qualitative insight is really important for that contextual understanding. I don't think you should be choosing one or the other. Yes, it's two approaches, but they really complement each other. So use qualitative to identify and prioritize, and then use that quantification element to justify and communicate. So you're kind of starting with the qualitative aspect, and then you layer in the quantification.
Yeah. So Johnny, sounds like we're getting into accuracy and precision in quantifying risk. Can you talk about the subtle differences between those?
Yeah, it's a difficult challenge. Obviously, what you don't want to be doing is rooting around every last nook and cranny in your business to try and answer the fundamental question of what strategically can we do. There's a the really important principle here is that we do not need to lift up every single stone, turning them over in the business. We need to be looking for what is meaningful. Yet at the same time, the things that we do find, we want to be absolutely confident of why they are important. So there's an important kind of evidence trail, if you like, which, as Laura's just said, is qualitative and quantitative about understanding why we have the risks, where they come from, why they matter, and the business side of that why question. But at the same time, there are numerous risks, in every business which actually are less important, and we don't want to be dwelling on those because we're after the things which matter to the business, not after the things which don't matter. So, does that help?
Yeah. And Casper, what's the insurer's perspective on that quantification question? Because, at the end of the day, I'm assuming you don't charge the same premium for everybody, or do you? There must be some assessment process and quantification of risk to you that you're making, and that's an external
Yeah,
perspective.
yeah, I think you've said it, Jeff. So we have to underwrite and provide insurance at scale, but also personalize it to the business as well. So just to give you a bit of insight, we work with very large data sets, particularly provided by our own and third parties. So what we can do is, if you are, let's say, you're a professional services firm, your revenue is X, we can benchmark what we think a loss for you or an event for you looks like based amongst your peer group. Okay, the way then that we treat you as bespoke or individual is then the nuts and bolts of the underwriting. So when you complete an application form for insurance, that is actually looked at. And what we do is we consider you in terms of our own internal standards. And much like I said, do you leave the front door open? Do you lock the windows? Not quite the same. Do you have a moat in your front garden kind of thing? The ones that do all of that will get better pricing. The ones that don't do that will either get worse pricing or we will not insure them.
Yeah. Hence, cyber essentials and the risk governance framework from the government would be helpful, just to get the idea where you should be putting at least some money. So let's get into the practical side. We want to make sure we wrap up this talk with some real takeaways for our audience today. So can each of you give me one or two practical tips for an SME that won't break the bank, don't require cyber tech or degrees, and something that they can actually go and do following this webinar? To improve their cyber resilience. So in no particular order, I'm going to start with Laurie.
Sure. We've not talked about this, but firstly, I think you need to understand kind of why are you wanting to adopt cyber risk quantification in the first place. I think there's real benefit in every organization understanding their risk exposure and how to better reduce risk, which is the main use case. But there are other use cases, like common ones I see are organizations wanted to secure security budget or they're creating their cyber strategy. Maybe you want that holistic top-down level, or maybe you want to understand portfolios of risk, so actually that bottom up. So maybe you want to do this across multiple business areas, or maybe you're across different geographies, or even go at a low level to a system level. So if one of those use cases apply to you, my recommendation would be to you don't have to go down the complicated threat modeling route at all. You can just storyboard, sit down, a couple of hours, the top couple few risk scenarios that would cause you harm. Maybe use a bow tie diagram or a flow chart to break down what is that threat, what is the target, how is it being, how could it be targeted, and then what are the consequences of those. And if you feel ready to start putting numbers against those consequences, use a range, such as most likely and worst case financial impact. And to do that, use the data that you've got. So you know what your revenue is, you know what your staff costs are, you know if you've got any SLAs with suppliers. Um, Casper gave a really good example around calculating revenue and do it by weeks. If you operate 365 days a year, even simpler, just divide it by 365, then multiply it by how many days of the scenario. But my tip is to really just to start small and not really start with something that's unmanageable.
Yeah, brilliant. Niall, similarly to you.
Yeah, take picking up a couple of themes we've touched on a few times throughout the last half an hour. I think it's one, start just with a conversation. Don't do any analysis. Just start a conversation in the business about what can we tolerate? We've talked about that. How much loss can we actually accept? There's no point thinking about risk if you don't have a baseline for making decisions against. But also the subject of very simply, what are we defending? And that comes into a few topics that have come up in the last half an hour around, are we a company that looks after sensitive data? Is our big number that we need to quantify around the potential fines or losses of that data? And if we're making Cornish pasties or a manufacturing business, then we need to focus in on availability. And then we do that calculation around annual revenue and divide it by the days or weeks to get an idea of how much we could lose if our manufacturing isn't happening and we're losing stock. But just start with a conversation about those things, and then you can go into more detail. But yeah, just ask the right questions and start talking at a business board level.
Brilliant. And Casper, without the obvious answer of buy insurance, what's your perspective?
No, I'm not going to say buy insurance. I would agree with what all the panel said before. I mean, the first thing to do is talk about where you think your risk is, because you can then work off the back of that. I didn't realize how much a business interruption event would cost us so quickly, or I had no idea. I've got 1 million personal PII within my database. Do I really need that? Two things from me. I mean, these are slightly more advanced. What we see a lot of is this is more to do with resilience. Businesses have backups, right? Everyone tells us they have a backup. They have an incident. They try and recover those backups. They don't always work. Do a test like that. If you can afford to do it, and you can get these relatively cheaply, or you can do it themselves, you can do cyber tabletop exercises which simulate a cyber event. I would say you can make them quite good fun. I did one. I was the head of HR. I was screaming at the CEO, we need to pay our employees, etc. But the idea of just going through an event first, you will have a much better experience if you ever find yourself in that situation.
Yeah, and it's worth mentioning. I know that the cyber crime unit for the Southwest, they do a lot of that. They go around a lot of organisations and businesses and help them go through those sorts of example attacks. And yeah, good way of getting started. So Johnny.
Yeah, I mean, much the same themes. Tabletops are great, and yeah, we've been involved in some entertaining ones over the years. I mean, I'd say the two, just to pick up on the themes that we've already had, the two big questions you're looking to answer with risk are, number one, appetite. As Noah said earlier, like that's often much less clear, particularly in, when you've got a larger team than it may appear. And then where is the risk? And thinking about the sort of key topics that we spoke about earlier: revenue, reputation, critical operations, compliance, and safety. And just getting that conversation going, as the others have said, diving into a deep analysis before having that framing is, yeah, don't start with the analysis first. Go for the high level conversation first and start to think about what actually would be our tolerance, where in the business can we tolerate things, because there will be some elements of the business where actually some risk is acceptable. But in other areas of the business it won't be acceptable, and those are the ones you obviously want to home in on. Yeah.
Brilliant. Yeah. It's interesting. You first used the word safety there. It reminds me because I do a lot of work in the IoT side of things where real systems connect with the real world. And
Yeah.
people do, it's interesting in German, the word for security and safety is the same. Um,
Got
they are identical words,
yeah,
just
right.
contextualized slightly differently. And it's absolutely true. And we're in an increasingly digital world. The safety of our staff, the safety of our environments, very often is now digital. And we should not forget that one. So it's just worth mentioning that one. Brilliant. So we have finished. We did aim to finish at 10. We've slightly overrun the panel session. Hopefully, we've got a good number of people still hanging on from the question for the quick Q&A session. I've only had one question come in so far, I believe. So we'll start with that one. And if others have questions that they want to raise, either in the text or if they just want to put their hand up, please feel free to do so. So, what can non-executive directors and boards do to upskill in this area? NEDs have to be across multiple areas, and most are not cyber experts, which is kind of where we started this whole thing, right? There's a tendency to focus on areas where board members feel more confident and knowledgeable until there's a cyber incident, of course. How do we stop kicking that can down the road while simultaneously sticking our heads in the sand? So I think that's kind of where we started the whole tour, right? It's like, we know people recognize that there's a high degree of risk, and yet at the same time, there's a low appetite to get into actually addressing that risk. So how do people, upskill themselves sufficiently to have that confidence? Yeah, Jack, you got an answer.
Yeah, I mean, just in the first instance, I'd strongly suggest that you use the cyber governance training that's been developed on NCSC's website. So that's a free resource. It doesn't presuppose sort of existing knowledge in the area. It's interactive modules that take an hour and 40 minutes to work through, but it's a really useful overview of the key actions that NEDs need to be able to be responsible and accountable for. So it's not going to give you absolutely everything, but I think they don't need to be experts in every board subject. I think it's just be able to develop enough knowledge so they can govern the risk more effectively. And I think that's what the NCSC's board training does. So I'd strongly encourage them to engage with that.
Yeah, Laurie?
If you want really high level, reach out to me and I'll happily explain some really simple approaches. If you want to go into a bit more detail, we are actually going to be running a workshop where I'll be giving out some templates to help cyber leaders in this kind of area to simplify how you do risk quantification without using a product and going into statistical modeling. And if you want to go into more depth, then I recommend you read How to Measure Anything in Cyber Risk, which is a great book. But yeah, pick what chapters you want to go through. You don't have to do it in order.
Oh, there you go. It seems like a common reading across some of the panelists there for that particular book. So I think there was another one from Bamidel when attack percentages are listed that are from the point of view of the intent of the threat that do not affect the SMEs, as in links in emails are reported. No, those statistics, Bamidel, were uh, consequential data in as much that the police only actually receive them once they have actually, they only count them once they start actioning against them because the risk has manifest in the business as a consequence. So those stats were actual hits, not because we both know that we're all being hit every day with emails with poor links in, and most of us are hopefully skipping over them and covering that. Sorry, Laura, did you have another?
Yeah, so not on the research that you were talking about, but just to explain, I didn't want to go into risk quantification methodology in this panel because you told us not to, but just to explain, when you're looking at likelihood for cyber risk quant, you can go in at the loss event frequency level, which is an incident has happened, like we want to go high level, or you can look at the underlying threat data to go in at the threat event frequency. So how persistent is the threat. So you can use that data and then apply a susceptibility multiplier to that. So is it a nation state hacker as the threat actor? What is the techniques they're using? And use that to further reduce that multiplier. But to be honest, when starting out, I really advise going down there, right, okay, we're looking at the scenario of third-party compromise or ransomware, whatever it is. And there's a 1 in 5 year chance that's 0.2, so that's 20%. So my likelihood is 20%. So that's like my loss event frequency. So you can either go in at the loss event frequency or threat event frequency, but really for starting out, I'd say go in at that kind of higher level loss event.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, so just want to wrap up here today because we are running slightly over time. So if you want to learn more, three of our panelists here, thank you very much, are going to be offering their time at no cost to run a series of workshops on the 24th of April between 10 o'clock and 4 o'clock at Exeter University. We're only asking for a charitable donation to our charity, which is the Children's Hospice of the Southwest. This is all part of a annual event called B-Sides, which is very much a cyber event, which is on the Saturday. But on the Friday, the 24th, we're going to be running these workshops. And if you really want to delve into, in fact, perhaps a couple of the people here can just briefly outline the kinds of things that you'll get to do in an hour and a half workshop, which will really help you get started on your assessment of your threat in your business and how to quantify it. So, Johnny, do you just want a couple of seconds on what your talk is about, and then
Yep. So we focus, as I said before, with tech companies or like companies that are operating technology, which increasingly is, more and more and more of us, technology that drives our businesses. And we'll be getting into a bit of threat modeling. So once where threat modeling fits in is, once you have sussed out these key themes of risk appetite, of where the risk is, etc. What next do you do about it? Where to invest? What's a sensible level to invest? Which controls are the best focus, etc. Just what is the best thing to do and when to stop. And threat modeling is all about covering those. Sounds like a very deep, dense, scary topic. It's not. That's why the workshop is only 90 minutes for me, and we'll be learning more about that then.
brilliant. And Laurie, you're going to be kicking them off, I think, on the day.
Yeah, so I'm going to start with I want you to come away from the workshop really with some templates and being able to go back to the business and be able to do cyber risk quantification exercise yourself. We'll do some modeling in the actual workshop, but focusing on, well, how do we use things like bow tie diagrams and flow charts in the aspect of threat modeling. But also I'm going to put more focus on how do you quantify impact against those consequence areas that we talked about.
Yeah, and there's a lot of different ways in which this challenge can be approached. So that's why we're running all three of these on the same day for the single price of £40. And so Niall, you've got a slightly different perspective on how you approach it and would help people work it through, right?
Yeah, I mean, we've already mentioned the Green Book, the how to measure anything cybersecurity. It gives you a good background. But what I'm going to do is take all that away for you. So idea believes so much in quantifying risk that we've actually built a platform to do all that maths and scary statistics in the background. And what you end up, or we'll focus on is, I'll use the risk platform, but really focusing in on how to analyze the high level risk scenarios, as we've talked about today, take a business lens on what can affect the business and build up those scenarios in terms of what's the source, what's the event, and what's the consequence, and then play that out in terms of measuring, as Laurie said, in terms of then starting to quantify those impacts and really think about the potential benefits. So then, as I said, plotting a range of different possible losses that can tailor your conversation about what the best controls to manage that risk are.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. So hopefully seeing a few of our attendees here today. In fact, I know a few of them have signed up for those workshops and hopefully a few more will. I've actually signed up myself because I thought it'd be interesting to go through it from my own point of view. So my day job is running a health tech startup. So I'm always open to being challenged about my security processes. So I'm going to be attending them too. So there you go. There's a recommendation. I'll put the £40 down. So excellent. Thank you very much to all of our panelists. Thank you very much, Jack, for coming along today. Really appreciate it. As I say, we will be putting this recording, minus Jack's content, up on our YouTube channel. So that feel free to come back and reference it. And I also put my email address in for those of you. I think, Jack, are you okay with me sharing your slide deck if people want a copy of it?
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
absolutely
brilliant.
fine.
Thank you. All right. So anybody wants a copy of Jack's slide deck, even though his recording won't be there, that will be available too. So thank you very much, and thank you for coming along.